accepting this invitation to come here
Oh,
and
my
speak.
pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah. So I just want to introduce Michael, my friend who I met within the business group that I'm part of. Shout out to BBS and Des. And Michael is a Vedic astrologer with over 25 years of experience. I'm going to put Michael's link in the description as well, so you can look at his stuff and contact him to work with him personally, because he's amazing at what he does. Michael also has a
Thank you.
YouTube channel with loads of videos. I know that a friend of mine follows you and really enjoys
Oh,
your
thank you. It's
material.
always good to hear.
Yeah, and I always found Michael so inspiring. And when I told Michael about this idea of bringing back this series of I Show Up As I Am, which basically has the intention to bring people to tell their stories of situations that help them step into more of who they are and show up in the world like that. So without hiding anymore, now Michael is showing exactly as he is right now. And I always love to hear about these stories because we need more of this, more vulnerability, more realness, especially in the online world. So I'm very grateful for Michael to be here. And we left this a little bit mysterious, even for both of us, because we wanted to have this conversation with you without planning it too much. So
It's
you're
always
going to
best that way.
get
Yeah,
genuine reactions from both sides.
exactly. I
And we
wanted,
are also looking forward for you to contribute to
oh, most
the
definitely.
conversation, right? So my intention
I
for
wanted,
this
uh,
is for this to expand our reality beyond what we believe it's possible. So anything that doesn't allow that, I'm just going to destroy and create it all. Right. Michael, would you like to step in and talk a little bit about yourself?
yeah, we were talking before and I was saying how when I do these things, my two normal reactions when I do lives or when I talk on camera are the looking at the camera a bit for a while and then I forget what I'm going to say next. And then I go like this and the eyes get rolled. And then I also sit here because if I don't hold my hands, which you can't see, then you start seeing this all over the place, right? Because my hands just go wild all over the place. So you'll notice me alternating between going like this and just kind of looking like nervous. And that's normal for me. But I wanted to connect with something about vulnerability, which is I think that people so many times are so afraid of showing that vulnerable side of themselves. And I think we do that naturally because of not feeling we can trust, not knowing if it's okay, not wanting to show that we're weak. And I think that's part of the animal side of our reaction still that, we kind of subconsciously do. But, as we have that capacity for self-consciousness, which can be both positive and equally sometimes very difficult. We also have that capacity to allow ourselves to be more vulnerable. And there's so much power available to you when you let yourself step into that space.
I agree with you. And it's that concept of vulnerability being the weakness that needs to be reframed. I like to think of vulnerability as that space where we're not having these walls around us that we have built to protect ourselves at some point, and we actually allow our energy to expand beyond any limitation, which is our true nature. So in truth, right now as adults, vulnerability means something different than it did when we were a child, because we depended on other people to survive. So now it's a bit different. And we get to join, the adult self and all that wisdom that we have and we know how to set boundaries, which was very different from back then.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. There's so much power in that. So I'd love to know, how did you start reclaiming that for yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that one part of me, to an extent, had it and then lost it, right? I shared with you a story once before when we were connecting, before we actually committed to doing this, about uh, right after high school when I went to university, where, I was wanting to be about as far away from where I grew up as I possibly could, which I think is quite normal a lot of the time. And so, with parents who weren't that comfortable with that because they wanted to be overly protective, even at that time, because I was the last child, and that's quite normal as per parental processes too, because for them, they're going through a threshold of going, my entire married life has been with children, and now comes this huge change, and what in hell am I going to do with this particular situation? And so I decided to move away to New York State. I had a brother who was actually uh, he had been to West Point, which is like the United States Military Academy. And he was there and he was teaching as well. And I was visiting with him at one point, and he was asking me what I was majoring in. And at the time, I told him I was majoring in creative writing, and he was going, "Oh, well, it's going to be really hard for you to be successful with that. I don't, you know, you're not really going to be able to achieve anything from a creatively oriented career. Why don't you just consider joining the army or something like that?" Which was completely, pardon me, the opposite of who I was. Right. And so I, listened to him and I heard what he said. I think I actually kind of argued back to the point, and I just decided I was going to disregard that statement from that moment onward. And,
That's very powerful.
yeah, and decided that, no, because at the time it was creative writing and that's what I was really interested in. And that morphed into a lot of other things, all which were creatively oriented, like music. For a while, I thought I was going to be a professional musician, and I had a similar experience with that particular scenario too, where I was confronting a situation where we had, with a band that I was in at the time, a lot of major label interests and like people who are from management associations, like showing up at our gigs and everything like that. And it reached a certain point where there was a conflict between myself and another person who I was in the band with. And we were kind of getting on the threshold of being able to get like a record deal. And I decided it's not going to work because I'm just going to be like locked up in a vehicle with this person for like days on end, and it'll drive me crazy. So decided to stop. Every time I've gone with that decision of making a decision by my heart, I've always been happy with it. I'm not saying those what if moments that they don't exist, because they do. But when I reflect back on those what if moments, that alternative situation always seems like, well, no, that would have been less desirable for you. And you probably made the right choice in that regard.
When you were in those moments,
yeah,
how did you connect with that desire from your heart? Is it like you had these two conflicting ideas of the things that you thought you should do and the things you really wanted to do? How is it that you received that guidance of this is actually not what I'm meant to be doing?
Yeah. I mean, for myself at those particular times, which I think it was different with the other experience I was telling you about, which we can touch on later. With those two experiences, it was almost like just a knowing It wasn't really like, sure, I did think about the other thing. The other thing, like, in other words, like, with the potential of being signed by, a record label and things like that, I did think about that. I did go, oh, well, that's kind of frustrating because I'm going to have to leave all that behind. But oh, I know that that's not right, really. I just know. And so it wasn't a question in that particular sense with it.
Mhm. And Anne is here saying in the topic of vulnerability that we were discussing,
Mhm.
I think a lot of it comes down to trusting ourselves and to allow
Yeah.
ourselves to express what we are passionate about without worrying about what others will think.
And that's a
what-
hard spot to get into. And sometimes I think into because we're not certain ourselves. Because I think that when we're young, we have a lot of conditioning that we
Mhm.
have to break over that. And that's not easy conditioning to kind of break out of. I think the
Mhm.
internet's cutting. Oh, there we go. Internet's still there. Good.
Yeah.
So it's it's not easy conditioning to find our way out of because we don't know it's there on a certain level. We just know that we're confused and we're doubting. But when you've been in a certain mindset and you find yourself in a situation over and over and over again, I mean, like for myself, wanting to do things that were more creatively inspired my whole life, it's like when it keeps popping up over and over again, and you try to do something that's different from that, and it's just something that ultimately doesn't really work. That's when you begin to have much more certainty in your heart. And when you try to go in a different direction and you just can't because the universe doesn't let you somehow.
Yeah, that is very true. It's like you hit a brick wall.
Yeah, exactly.
And is saying, I'm still in the process of breaking through that conditioning. It definitely is not easy. Yeah, it's not. And I also think
No.
that we need to be very compassionate and patient with ourselves as well. Because, for example, you were saying that when your brother said those things to you, you kind of stood your ground, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
I
definitely.
remember being also told, don't go to arts because there's more opportunities in science. And I was so much in the people pleasing that I didn't even say no. I just said yes right away. And suddenly I took the turn to the path of that felt really dark. I mean, bit by bit, I
Yeah.
started losing access to the things I actually enjoyed until I found myself in a place where I didn't know who I was anymore because I had taken so many of those turns that were away from the center,
Yeah.
from that heart guidance that you were talking about.
Yeah. And that's the confusing place to be in. That's the dark place to be in when you don't know yourself in that particular capacity. It's something interestingly enough that in what I do, because even though as an astrologer I do prediction, I also, this is my preferred way to work with people, is getting to the root cause of the issues that the person's working with. So if somebody's coming to me wanting to know about how relationships are going to go, I'd much rather go into why are you having a hard time with relationships and get in and understand that. But one of the things I deal with probably more than anything else is people who are in a position where they have this inner calling and they're blocked in terms of letting themselves do it.
I love
People,
that you approach it that way, that
yeah,
you go to the root, because that's what I was going to ask. For example, in this situation of breaking through the conditioning and worrying less about what other people think and stepping into that self-trust, how do you usually see that within astrology and Vedic astrology?
um, there's a lot of different things that can create that. The North Node, which in Vedic astrology we call Rahu, when that's conjunct the sun, quite often with people in that regard, they've had an experience with an authority figure. Sometimes it's their mother or their father, where they've been in a position where they were always told, when you grow up, you're going to do this. When you grow up, you're going to do this. And so then when they grow up, since they've been told what they were going to do their whole life, they don't know who they actually are. And so they end up spending a lot of their life trying to identify who they are out there. Like, oh, I'm an astrologer. Oh, I'm a musician. Oh, I'm like an artist, or whatever the case may be. And they usually get really into certain pursuits for a really passionate period of time, and they burn their way through it. And then they recognize that's not who they are. And then they latch on to the next concept and they do the same thing over and over again, because the thing that they're going through is identifying themselves with something out there. When they're not out there, they're in here. And so they can't find themselves because they're looking in the wrong spot. Also, when you have the North Node and the Ascendant, those types of things can happen too. Saturn conjunctions can sometimes create an authoritative figure that makes a person like Saturn, along with a self indicator like the sun or the moon, or if you know your ascendant in astrology, whichever planet rules your ascendant, sometimes Saturn with that can make it hard for the person to step into who they are too. So many different ways.
Yeah. And yeah, if any of you who are watching and you'd like to have these breakthroughs with Michael, feel free to reach out. Yeah, because as you can see, Michael knows his stuff. And I was curious. So you said that in that tour that you chose to go separate ways, to follow your heart. And where did that lead you?
A long journey of several different businesses. I was, at one point I used to practice Reiki. I was really into essential oils. Like I knew like essential oils inside out. Used to work with people using those for therapy along with doing Reiki, and had a period of time where I got invited to give all these talks at health spas, which were a lot of fun because I got to get put up for free in those particular instances and got VIP treatment, until the person I knew who was connecting me with all those speaking engagements decided to leave the job. And so there went those opportunities. So I went from there to deciding I was going to open up a yoga studio, because I used to teach Kundalini yoga. And I found an apartment and ended up polyurethaning the floors, resanding them, learning how to install dimmer switches on lights and all these things, doing it all myself, and got ready and opened everything up. Had to go to the planning board in the town. I remember that too, and got denied permission because they were trying to get some extra parking spaces for a restaurant that came into town. And I was being used as a way to kind of do that. And got told that by the building inspector. He goes, here's what you need to do, right? And so I did it and ended up getting approved, opened up the yoga studio, had it open for a while. And then my landlady decided she was going to move back to France. And she was going to sell the building to this other person. So she told me about that. And one day I got a knock on my door. And I went to open the door and he goes, hey, I'm the new landlord. Do you mind if I take a look around your place? And I was like, sure, no problem. He looks in, he goes, wow, you did a really good job polyurethaning these floors. It's really nice in here. I was like, oh, thank you. He goes, well, that's all. I just wanted to take a look in. Okay. And I got a letter in the mail about a week later saying, I'm going to raise the rent of your apartment $200. And, you're welcome to stay, but if you can't pay it, you're going to have to move out. So I ended up losing the apartment and the yoga studio at that point. And so I started thinking of myself as a failure, like, oh, everything I've done, I've been a failure at. I still continued to teach yoga, and I was the only person who taught the type that I taught, like within a 20-mile radius. So I used to sometimes drive 20 or 30 miles to teach, and one person would show up, or sometimes nobody would show up. And so I looked at myself and I judged my success based on who was there, who else was showing up.
Yeah.
Until I recognized success wasn't about who else was showing up, it was about me showing up,
Oh, yeah.
you know? And a little switch went on in my head after that. So having that experience, I ended up having a reading once by somebody who did Vedic astrology. I had a connection because I had previously lived with a professional astrologer. But I got a reading from somebody who did Vedic astrology, and I sat down in the chair and they asked me like 2 or 3 questions about my father. And I gave them the answer, and they went, "Oh, you were actually born 1 minute and 10 seconds earlier." And I'm sitting here going, "How the hell did you know that?" You know, and so I was like amazed and going, "Wow, you know, how did you do that?" And now I look back on it and I go, "Oh, well, it's easy. I know how he did that." He was, you know, adjusting my birth time on the fly by asking me some questions, but it, you know, it shocked me. And so I got really interested in it. And so I started studying and bumped into my friend who was the professional astrologer. And he said to me, "You know, I've got a waiting list that's like 6 months to a year long. Do you want to jump in?" And so, poof, just went right into it and started having tons and tons of readings to do with people. And eventually, those ended up reaching an end. And I kind of get the feeling that he felt, I don't mean for this to sound arrogant, but like the feedback I was getting was that he somehow felt threatened by me being like doing things for him. And so he didn't want me to like do any more work on his site, you know. So I went my separate ways with that. Ended up getting married somewhere along the way, but my business was collapsing, and ended up in a position where I didn't have like enough money. And my now ex-wife didn't have a lot of money either. And we had a child, and my business had collapsed, and I couldn't earn enough money. And we ended up being homeless for, you know, like a good several years. And by homeless, I mean really homeless, like living in hotels. That particular time in the States, things like family shelters, things like that, they weren't really an option because they'd split the family apart. Not family shelters, I should say. The other shelters aside from family shelters would do that. Family shelters themselves would keep the family together, but they were all full, so you couldn't get into one of those. So we just had to make our way through that. Every time I tried to take on a different job other than doing astrology, I couldn't get a job. I had gaps in my employment, so no one wanted to really hire me to do anything else. And when you don't have any permanent address and you try to apply for a job, it creates a whole other can of worms
Yeah.
in a situation like that. So all I could really do was astrology. And so I kept doing astrology. And, you know, it was the only thing that would bring in any money when I was able to earn money, but it didn't bring in enough money at that particular point. So at a certain point, I ended up finding somebody else who let other astrologers work through their site in order to get some readings. And so I worked for them for a while, and that began to give me a regular salary from doing astrology again. And knowing a little bit of web design, and on one level, I kind of hope my friend who knows this is listening to this because they'll probably get a laugh at it. There's a really well-known Vedic astrologer, and it was known at the time that if you got invited onto his channel, that you would have like a big boost in your success, right? So I knew a little bit about web design, and I went onto his YouTube page and I looked at the keywords he was using in all of his videos. And I copied the keywords and I used them in my videos, which meant that at that time, because this is the way YouTube worked, was that at the time when he went to watch one of his own videos, my videos would pop up on the right. over there, so he couldn't help but notice that I was over there, and went on and clicked it, and I got invited onto his channel, and the rest is really history in terms of how I began to get back into a space where I could do astrology again professionally and actually earn well from it. But I went through such a transformation where I tried to do so many other things like day jobs, odd jobs here and there, which I could occasionally get an odd job, but nothing that was really permanent because astrology just wouldn't let me do anything else really. And I recognize that
Wow.
now. That's why that all happened. And I had to go through the school of hard knocks with it, really, because there was compassion for other people to be gained through that, and an understanding of suffering and difficulty and
Yeah.
all those things I wouldn't have had such an experience with if I wouldn't have gone through that.
Yeah. I feel that from you though. I feel that compassionate nature, and also that you ask right away, how can I support you?
Yeah.
And I feel like that really comes from a person who would really like to have received that kind of message
Yeah,
when that was happening. So
definitely.
I feel that from you, and also that you are really, destined to do what you are doing now. Because having that happen of you trying all these different streams of income and all
Mhm.
these options, and you are really tenacious. And I'm using this word because
Oh,
we
yeah.
talked about this, right?
Yeah.
And it's like keep going, don't give up. And
I had no choice.
yeah,
I had a family and I had to, every day, sometimes every day I was having to find a way of keeping a roof over our head, like every single day. So it was just no choice. So you just you learn from it. And then when you get into your own business and you begin to be successful with it, you go, this is easy as pie because I've already been through
yeah,
learning how to be tenacious. And so,
incredible. And
yeah.
Stella is now joining us, Becky as well. Hi, Stella and Becky. Thank you so much for being here. And Anne also says, I can resonate with that when we were talking about, following our heart. I used to do that a lot. And I'm grateful that I now found my soul purpose and I'm working towards following that. Yeah. I think it's that
I wonder
thing.
what, I was going to say, I
Sorry.
wonder what Anne is, wonder if Anne would like to share with us in the comments a little bit of her journey with that.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Everyone is invited.
Yeah,
Please do
definitely.
share with us
Yeah.
a bit of your journey with that of following your purpose and your heart, your own journey with tenacity and hope. And keep going even when there's like these ups and downs in life. And Becky is
Yeah,
saying tenacity is one of my languages.
exactly. I find, a lot of times people, and this is something else I encounter in my work, is people think that sometimes if you do the right thing, then everything's just going to naturally flow to you and it'll get really easy. And sadly, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. The only thing it does is that somehow it gives you the strength to keep going.
Exactly.
Because you have that vision and
Exactly.
I'm not going to give up this. Like, I don't know how I'm going to make it through, but this is happening. I don't know
And
how, but
yeah, and when you're in a position of helping other people too, another good thing I've been trying to do much more lately is when I'm going through hardship myself, I just kind of say to myself, okay, what can I take from this to help somebody else? Why am I experiencing this? Let's I call it breathing into the difficulty or breathing into the tension, whether it's like anxiety or fear, just breathing into it, recognizing that there's something inside of you that's trying to expand
yeah,
from facing that constriction,
I love that.
and let yourself face the constriction and move beyond it And then another layer happens too. And it just
Mhm.
kind of keeps going on and on like that. But, at the same time, you become more and more whole. And rather than closing down, you become more and more open, really.
Mhm. And it's not the first time I hear you speaking about that, breathing into it.
Yeah.
And you said something very interesting there. What a huge awareness it is to say, I'm experiencing this that is uncomfortable, but something
Yeah.
within me is trying to expand.
Yeah.
That's huge. First
Yeah.
of all, it's
Because,
extremely courageous
yeah.
because when you're dealing with anxiety, you just want to get out, to stop feeling that way.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
see, I'm convinced, like, and I mean, a lot of people talk about these concepts too, like anxiety, fear, anger, they all serve like a positive purpose. But what ends up happening is after they've served their positive purpose, we tend to kind of cling on to them
Yes.
because we don't know how to move through the emotions. So if you consciously just go,
Yeah.
right, this anger is motivating me. So rather than sitting with the anger, I'm going to get motivated. I'm not going to
Oh.
repress the anger. I'm going to let myself feel it. I'm going to let it move. But what am I needing to motivate? Right. Anxiety is tied in with fear. It just makes you feel a little more
Mm.
anxious and edgy about it. And once you know that thing that you're afraid of, if you can kind of go, well, you can either go, I can accept the outcome of that because I may not have a choice, or
Mm.
you can go, right, I'm going to work against the outcome of that because I'm going to try to change the situation a little bit. But in either of those instances, you reach a point where you're going, the anxiety has awakened something inside of me, but I
Mhm.
don't need to stay with it,
Mhm.
really.
I was thinking that sometimes that holding on to it is also the manifestation of resistance
Yeah,
to
exactly.
change.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
And Becky was saying I was homeless from 15 with more trauma than a child should, but
Mhm.
became very self-sufficient and hit the wall at 30. A life of survival mode
Yeah.
stopped it, hit a purpose crisis and rebuilt from there. Drop the mask if you like.
Yeah. Sorry you had that experience, but I can really empathize with that.
Mm. And Stella is saying, I realize that I have to start with who I am and what lights me up, and having to stay true to that despite various challenges. Expansion
Yeah.
can definitely be uncomfortable.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is too, is if you are doing a business and you're faking it in order to do your business, then you're not going to be like, even any degree of success that you have, you're going to go, I'm not able to relax into myself. I'm only able to like do this facade so I can kind of get through this situation. And that's a really difficult thing in the business world, is to be able to just kind of go, I can just be myself. And as you say, show up as you are. I can just do that because it's who I am. And it's really no other choice but to do that.
Yeah, and Annie is sharing that I decided to finally listen to my intuition this year and embarked on on my Reiki journey. My goal was to be Reiki 1 attune this year, and now 8 months later, I am a Reiki master. Woohoo! I have been doing free distance healing sessions for animals to collect some testimonials before putting my offers out there. The the feedback I have received has really warmed my heart. It's lovely when that happens.
Good. Excellent.
I have always had a very strong affinity with animals, and they have always been there for me throughout my life, giving me love, support, and companionship, so I want to pay it forward to them. By providing complementary therapies for animals, that is my way of saying thank you to them. I now also have a diploma in animal communication, and I'm about to
Nice.
embark on another diploma in crystal healing for animals. And Becky says, I'm not sorry for them. They've shaped who I chose to become. What I'm seeing a lot in common with the comments and the stories and your story, Michael, is first of all how brave it is to be able to look back and draw in the wisdom
Yeah.
because sometimes things are so painful that to actually have that awareness and have chosen to look at it through those lenses, I think it's already very brave and shows a lot of um, awareness as well, and self-love, and that raising consciousness of what is actually sitting behind all
Mm.
these layers. Of course, after processing all this stuff, and then, as you said, how can I now bring these to the people that I help and serve?
Well, one of my first experiences with that was when I was in the midst of the time that I was homeless. Even in the middle of that, I found reason to laugh. And I would sometimes think, and I would go, even though I'm in this situation, there are some people who are in even worse situations, really. And you recognize, even though you may not be in the most ideal of situations, there are some people who are even, like worse off than you are in that capacity. And I had an experience that I'll always remember, where I was walking along and I encountered this man who was also homeless. And he looked really depressed and really down. So I went over and I just started talking to him for a second. And, I said, you seem really depressed. What's going on? He goes, well, I look around me at all these people driving by in cars, and people, going about with their day, and people who have their own houses and things like that. And I look at myself and I just feel like I'm a complete and utter failure. And I said, well, I'm going to ask you a personal question. How much debt do you have? He said, only a couple of $1,000. I said, do you have any credit cards or anything like that? Which I knew the answer, of course, was no. He said, no. I said, a lot of these people that you're witnessing, not to judge them, but a lot of these people that you're witnessing as being in a better off position than you are, they have so much more debt than you do. And they, the way they're staying in those lifestyles, a lot of them is through credit cards and things like that. So one of the things that's separating you from them really is just a piece of plastic. So don't look at yourself as being such a failure, because you're not really. You're just in a different state of existence, which has you in a position where you're not within that framework, so to speak. It's just a different framework, really. And it picked up his spirit a little bit, and he felt like he was able to continue and not judge himself quite so negatively, really. And it wasn't about judging those other people either. It was just about getting him to take a look at, it's not so much that you're down and out or a failure. You're just in a position where you have to lead your life in a different way, because you don't have a choice. So
If you looked back at your life at those times, and you could give any advice to that version of you, just like you gave to that man, what would you like to have heard that would bring you some comfort?
I think that the words "keep going" are very important, because I was reading somebody else post recently about confronting a situation where they were considering suicide and everything like that, and talking about how they made it through it and everything like that. And when you get into those spaces, it becomes scary in that particular way sometimes. So the other thing that I would have liked to have heard is, this is a temporary thing. It's just something you're going through right now. It will end, it'll reach, a finality, and you'll be in a different position. So even though it seems like complete and utter hell right now, just keep going through it, and don't let it take your soul, really. Stay open. Yeah, that's another one too. So you asked me for one thing, I had to give you several.
Doesn't matter. It had to come out. Yeah. Well, when you are struggling, even if it's not to that degree. We have a hard time to zoom out
Oh yeah.
and see that it's not going to be forever. So
Mm.
that's a really good advice that I have found myself nowadays reaching that,
Mm.
as in when things go into that downward spiral,
Mm-hmm.
actually the thought pops in, maybe 4 days from now, this thing, this emotion, this, say, anxiety or shame or guilt, whatever it is that I'm experiencing that feels like it's overwhelming, it's probably going to subside.
Yeah.
But that didn't come to me before. And what I think that makes the shift is that self-trust, that we
Yeah.
are able to navigate those times and that we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really big thing.
Yeah, and it's not always the easiest thing to have that self-trust in those places. But when you begin to recognize when you come up against situation after situation where things could really go either way, and you come out of situation after situation, and you're still there and you're okay, you begin to recognize that, it can all be okay somehow.
Mm.
During that time too, I had an experience where I started, like, things were getting so stressful that I reached a period where I was like, I had a day where I was hyperventilating and I was getting a pain in my kidneys. And I ended up having to go to the emergency room and, told them what was going on in my life. They said, you need to calm down. Like, even in the midst
Easier
of,
said than done.
yeah, you need to calm down somehow. I know it's hard, but you've got to, like, not let all the stress, control you. And I actually did get something from that.
Yeah. How do you, for example, now when you look into the future and imagine that you have this vision for the world, from everything that you've experienced and how you'd like the world to be, what is your vision?
It's interesting. I think I've reached a point in my life where I've accepted the world as it is, if you know what I mean,
Mm.
right? I think there's this really huge learning experience we're all going through, and we need opposition. We need, like, people who don't get along with us. We need friends. We need people who don't get along with us, because we have to have these learning experiences. But if I had to step outside of that bound of things, right? I think that there's a whole lot that can be done for people to not have to do without food. Yeah. But equally, when I hear that concept, I think about it and I go, yeah, there's no reason that anybody should have to be without food, but there's something that souls get sometimes by going through that experience. So there's two sides of it, really. There's the thing of accepting the world as it is, but looking at what you would like to see a lot more of in the world. And I'd like to do away with starvation. I'd like to see animals being treated more nicely, because that's a very big thing for me. Yeah.
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 And when I asked the question, I was also referring a lot to your contribution. Even when you think about your clients and why you do what you do, how do you see them? Because you have a big contribution to the world that no one can do.
Mm.
No.
I see people, when I'm looking, especially at their horoscope, I'm seeing people who have a lot of potential, and they sometimes don't see it for themselves. Like one of my favorite experiences with that recently is there was this client that I had who had this really powerfully soft, gentle voice. Like it was powerful. It was a healing voice. And one of the things I could see from their horoscope is that voice could accomplish so much for you. And they said, I have always hated my voice because I've always felt it was too wimpy and too soft and gentle. And so they came to a different understanding of those things. So you can really see a person's potential through their chart. You can also see in a lot of instances, you can see in every instance what they're meant to learn from the experience, which is why on one level, when people focus heavily on prediction, what I see is that they need to get to the root cause of what's behind them seeking that prediction, because that thing that they're concerned about is there for a reason, because there's something they have to gain from it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that when I'm looking at charts of my clients, I'm seeing people who are just wanting to live more in their potential and have more meaningful lives and have passion in their lives and not feel like they're stuck on a treadmill. So I like to see myself as helping people to get off those treadmills, so to speak.
Stella is saying, this is so beautiful, accepting the world as it is. And what a beautiful gift to notice those trends in people. And Becky says, right? And Stella also says, we can do it. We can go through difficult situations and we come out so much stronger. And then there's a lot here. Becky says, you become so humbled by considering what other people wake up to.
Yeah, definitely.
And says, I'm working on building up my self-belief and to trust myself. I have so many wonderful friends telling me how talented I am. I just need to let myself see this. I think
You need
this
to let
is why
yourself feel it too. Yeah, let yourself feel it.
I think this is why I'm holding myself back.
Mhm.
Then Becky says, it's hard to see ourselves how others do because it's their eyes seeing. Believing what people say helps with self-belief. And Becky says also, I agree, I was once ready to give up completely. I'm glad I fought for myself and my life as much as my heart fights to keep me alive. Yeah. There's a lot of support here for you, Michael.
Always good.
So tell me about when you chose this title, the Aligned and Empowered, what came up for you when you chose that?
It's interesting. I'm not really, I think maybe chose isn't the right word for it. It just kind of came to me, really. And sometimes it's really hard to explain a feeling, so to speak.
Mm. It was that heart guidance that you were talking about before.
I think in a lot of circumstances, the main problems in people's lives generally just center around them not being themselves, really, and going through those experiences of becoming who they are and having to tune into that more deeply. And so, it was more from the thing of trying to understand what I'm wanting to do with people through astrology, because quite often we think we need to resist the experiences that we're going through astrologically, when instead, there's something we have to gain from it, even if it's challenging. And if we can look at that, then, we get the meaning of the moment. We can find meaning in the challenges and even in the things that are going well, then we just get so much out of the experience.
Right. So we're now reaching to 7 p.m., which I know you'll have to go very soon. So
Sadly, yes.
if you had a message to give to the people who are watching live and those who watch on replay, what would that be?
I want to think on that one for a second, but I also don't want to sit here looking like I'm going
It's okay.
for too long.
I can speak a little
Yeah.
whilst you think. So I'm going to put in the chat the link to Michael's website, just so that any of you can follow up with him and find more about Michael does. Yes.
I think what I would say is sometimes we get stuck with the process of what we're going through, right? When we're in that and we're going, well, one of these days I'm going to be in this position, or one of these days this will happen, or one of these days I'll be in this successful space. Feel yourself in that space already. This is a lot of work I'm doing with my clients recently, is like really working with them to see what they're wanting to kind of create in their lives, and then feeling it, letting themselves feel it, letting themselves express what it feels like to have that. Because the more they kind of focus on what it feels like to already have it, the more they're kind of moving themselves in that particular direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then their actions will align with getting there.
And I feel like that's the thing that you were also saying before, that even the words just keep going would be very comforting. And
Mhm.
I feel like here also, when you see yourself in that vision and you step into that feeling, you know you're going to get there.
Yeah.
You just don't know how, but then that thing of keep going, because you know you'll get there. And
Exactly.
the way you get there, it doesn't really matter. You know you're going to get there. And that is like that light at the end of the tunnel that at the same time allows you to be in the present moment, because you detach
Exactly.
yourself
Yeah.
from that, because that's a given, right?
Yeah.
You're going to get there.
Yeah.
So how does it feel right now? And what actions can I take right now?
Definitely.
I relate to that. Yeah. Becky says, yes, I've been doing this a lot, and emotionally, energetically, and vibrationally has been amazing. And Anne says, I've been using visualization, and when I close my eyes and visualize doing what I love, I feel so happy, grateful, and thankful. Yes, that vision that really lights you up. I've been doing the same.
Good.
So, Michael, do you have anything